Imagine a painter who, by the age of 14, could reproduce a human face, a pair of hands, or every fold in a piece of fabric almost exactly as he saw it. Yet years later, that same man placed both eyes on one side of a face and moved the mouth and nose out of place, showing several angles at once. He did not do this because he could not draw. He did it because he understood drawing almost too well. So why did Pablo Picasso choose to break the perfect image? The answer is hidden not only in his art, but also in poverty, love, war, and his relentless need to keep changing. His story began on October 25, 1881, in Malaga, Spain. His father, José Ruiz Blasco, was a painter and art teacher, while his mother was Maria Picasso. Pablo would later choose to use his mother's surname, Picasso. According to family stories, he was fascinated by pencils from a very young age. That detail may have grown into a legend over time. But one thing is certain, his father quickly realized that Pablo was no ordinary child. The family first moved to Acuca and later to Barcelona. With each move, a larger artistic world opened before him, but his talent would not only open doors. It would also build a cage he would spend much of his life trying to escape. This is where the story becomes truly surprising. When Picasso entered the La Latja School of Fine Arts in Barcelona, he was already advanced enough to study alongside students much older than himself. He learned anatomy, perspective, light, and classical composition. If you look at the paintings from his teenage years, you may find it difficult to believe they were created by the same person who later helped invent Cubism. They are realistic, controlled, and highly academic. Picasso did not break rules he failed to understand. He mastered them first, and then decided they were no longer enough. His real goal was not simply to copy what the eye could see. He wanted to reveal what the mind and emotions experienced at the same time. But Picasso had not yet become the Picasso we know today. In Barcelona, he met other young artists at a café called Els Quatergats. He studied in Madrid and traveled to Paris for the first time in 1900. Paris was the center of the art world, but it was not as romantic as it appeared from the outside. There were freezing studios, empty pockets, loneliness, and uncertainty. Then, in 1901, his close friend Carlos Casagemas took his own life. The loss deeply affected Picasso. It was as though the colors in his paintings went dark one by one. Soon, shades of blue began to dominate his work. Picasso's first great transformation was born not from artistic technique, but from grief. It may feel as though the energy of the story is fading here. In reality, Picasso's emotional power is about to explode. Between 1901 and 1904, during what became known as his Blue Period, he painted the poor, the elderly, prisoners, blind people, and those pushed to the edges of society. In works such as The Old Guitarist, bodies stretch, faces fall silent, and blue stops being just a color. It becomes a state of mind. Picasso was no longer showing the world exactly as it appeared. He was showing the weight it left behind in people. But he did not remain in this darkness forever. That was one of his defining qualities. The moment a style began working too well, he started searching for a way out of it. And this is where the story changes color. Picasso settled in Paris in 1904 and began working in the Bateau Lavoir, an old, run-down building filled with artist studios. His relationship with Fernande Olivier, his new social circle, and his fascination with circus performers brought warmer pinks and earthy tones into his paintings. The acrobats, clowns, and traveling performers of his Rose period may appear more colorful, but a quiet sense of loneliness still remains on their faces. During these years, collectors such as Gertrude Stein began supporting him, and Picasso's name became increasingly well known. But instead of becoming comfortable and repeating the same successful style, he made a dramatic change that would shock even the people closest to him. Now we arrive at the moment when the image truly begins to break apart. Together with Georges Braque, Picasso developed a new visual language known as Cubism. Imagine looking at a glass not from one fixed position, but while walking around it, at different moments. You see its top, its side, its handle, and its interior. Cubism attempted to bring all those separate views together on a single surface. That is why faces and objects often appear to have been broken into pieces of glass. But the purpose was not to make the world meaningless. It was to show that a single point of view may not be enough to describe reality. Picasso was not simply destroying the image. He was trying to expand what seeing could mean. But Cubism did not stop at breaking objects into fragments. Picasso and Braque soon began placing newspaper clippings, wallpaper, printed letters, and ordinary materials directly into their work. This stage, known as synthetic cubism, played a clever game with the viewer. Were we looking at a table, a painting of a table, or just a few pieces that reminded us of one? The canvas was no longer simply a silent window looking out at the world. It became an object with its own reality and its own rules. The influence of this revolution can still be seen in collage, poster design, advertising, and modern digital imagery. Picasso was no longer only making paintings. He was helping redefine what a painting could be. Just when everyone began to associate Picasso with Cubism, he changed direction again. During the First World War, Braque left to serve in the military, bringing their intense creative partnership to an end. In 1917, Picasso designed sets and costumes for the ballet's Russes, where he met the ballerina Olga Koklova. They married the following year. Around this time, larger, heavier, and more classical figures began appearing in his paintings. From the outside, it looked as though he had returned to the past. But this was not a retreat. It was another experiment. Picasso did not have one permanent style. Constantly changing styles was his true style. Repeating a language he had already mastered felt, to him, like another form of artistic imprisonment. But there is a darker side of this story that cannot be ignored. The women in Picasso's life, including Olga Koklova, Marie-Thérèse Walter, Dora Maar, Francoise Gillet, and Jacqueline Roch, were often described only as his muses. But Dora Maar was an accomplished photographer who documented the creation of Guernica. Francoise Gillet was a successful painter with a career of her own. Picasso's infidelity, controlling behavior, and the emotional damage he left behind in his relationships are discussed far more openly today. None of this means his art must simply be erased, but it reminds us that genius is not a moral exemption. To understand Picasso honestly, we need to leave room for admiration and discomfort at the same time. Then a single painting carried all of Picasso's experiments into the middle of a war. In 1937, while the Spanish Civil War was raging, Spain's Republican government asked Picasso to create a major work for the Paris International Exposition. At first, he was unsure what to paint. Then, on April 26, the Basque town of Guernica was bombed by German and Italian aircraft supporting Franco's forces. The destruction experienced by its civilians pushed Picasso into action. He began working on an enormous canvas nearly 8 meters, or 26 feet, wide. His goal was not to show a specific building or create a military map. He wanted to make the destruction that war causes inside human beings visible. When you look at Guernica, you do not see a heroic battle scene. Color has almost completely disappeared. Its black, white, and gray tones resemble newspaper photographs. Screaming mother, a wounded horse, a bull, broken bodies, and a harsh light strike the viewer all at once. The exact meaning of its figures is still debated, but the emotion of the painting is unmistakable: panic, loss, and helplessness. The fragmented language Picasso developed through Cubism was no longer just a formal experiment. And Guernica, it became the psychology of war. And now the reason he spent years distorting faces and spaces becomes much clearer. Sometimes an orderly image cannot express a reality that has been shattered. But Guernica was not the end of the story. Picasso remained in Paris during the German occupation in the Second World War, because the Nazis were hostile toward modern art. Openly exhibiting his work became difficult. Still, he continued to create. In 1944, he joined the French Communist Party. His later image of a dove became one of the most recognizable symbols of the international peace movement. Even so, it would be misleading to turn Picasso into a flawless political hero. His beliefs, choices, and personal behavior were often filled with contradictions. Perhaps that is part of what makes him so compelling. In his paintings, he rarely presented simple answers. Instead, he showed how opposing ideas and emotions could exist at the same time. We have now reached the age when most artists begin to slow down. Picasso, however, surprises us again. After the war, he worked extensively with ceramics in the south of France, transforming plates, jugs, and ordinary containers into birds, faces, and animals. He continued experimenting with sculpture, printmaking, stage design, and reinterpretations of paintings by the old masters. He repeatedly returned to works such as Velázquez's Las Meninas, translating them into his own visual language. Picasso did not want to copy the past. He wanted to argue with it. For him, art was not a task that could ever be completed. It was a permanent experiment. As he grew older, his lines became freer and his creative energy became even more fearless. Picasso died on April 8, 1973, in Maucans, France, at the age of 91. He left behind tens of thousands of paintings, drawings, prints, ceramics, sculptures, and designs. His role in the development of Cubism, his use of collage, and the creation of Guernica permanently transformed the visual language of the 20th century. But after his death, other questions became increasingly difficult to ignore. How should we judge the unequal power within his relationships? How should we describe the influence he took from artistic traditions outside Europe? Can we recognize great art and a deeply flawed human being at the same time? These questions do not make Picasso's legacy smaller. They allow us to examine it more honestly. Now let us return to the question we asked at the beginning. Why did Picasso, a man who could draw realistically, deliberately break apart faces and objects? Because, to him, reality was not limited to the smooth surface that sees in a single moment, a face remembered from the front and the side at once, our changing view as we move through a room, the weight grief leaves inside the body, and the confusion of war were all parts of reality too. The Blue Period transformed emotion into color, Cubism transformed time and multiple viewpoints into form, Guernica transformed collective suffering into a shattered image. We do not have to admire Picasso as a person, and we should not ignore the harm he caused in his life, but the reason he remains important is now clear. He showed us that painting does not merely copy the world, it can also become a way of rethinking it.